Hello, my name is Justin Bright, and welcome to Kerbal Space Program version 1.8.1 in my next small step RP-1 career playthrough. And here we have a brand new launcher, finally, that I have spent some time designing that is based on the Drop Tank Atlas configuration, which is a kind of a community designation of not doing the stage and a half version of the Atlas, but using all of the other components and kind of the general shape of the Atlas. So yeah, that's what we've got. Let's see how this goes. Standing alone in the darkness is the Tela-1 launcher, which is bringing up our first probe to the moon, but hopefully the engines ignite. Ignition. And liftoff of the Tela-1, even though I have not tested these engines before now, it looks like they are moving just fine, and I am very, very happy and grateful about that as I'm scurrying around trying to figure out where the force roll is. There we go. 90 turn 180 should put this so that, there we go, so that it is coming down kind of parallel flatwise to the direction that it is turning, which I find to be that works better. Yeah, so here we go. Finally, first new launch of a new rocket in a while. I'm super excited about it. Oh no! Okay. Transient shutdown of the NA3 has turned our beautiful probe into a cloud of debris. Oh man. That was an expensive failure. So let's pull the trigger on range safety and call that good. Oh, there's so much debris. Okay. Well, I really thought I was going to get away with that, but that really should not be all that unexpected. That was a brand new rocket that was the first launch. They had like a 30% chance to fail on ignition, so there should be no surprise about that happening. But we've left ourselves a duplicate in the build queue. We've left ourselves with plenty of money in the budget to handle that failure. And theoretically, I think we should even have plenty of time. We have 542 days to make this contract work and 177 to launch our weather satellite. So we'll probably knock that one out first and then give the Lunar Orbiter another shot. All right, so while that is finishing, we have just gotten digital communications finished. So that incredibly exciting node that doesn't look all that exciting gives us an increase in our communications technology to level 2, which is actually a pretty huge upgrade from what I'm looking at in the wiki. So according to the Real Antennas wiki, the upgrade from starting technology to lunar range communications gets you a pretty decent upgrade, but they're still using analog transmitters. They're just a little bit better miniaturized and give you pretty high power draw. So the upgrade from technology level 0 to 1, which is what we did with lunar range communications back here, gets you just improvements on the existing World War II era analog transmitters. So they're still pretty high power draw, and you know the antennas work kind of the way that you've seen them with my lunar range crafts, where we're able to communicate, but it is massively power hungry and we have to shut it off and recharge pretty much all the time. Now, this upgrade represents the jump to digital communications, which is really, really cool. What that means is, for us, according to the wiki, that increases the bandwidth by almost 16 times. So that is going to be much better sensitivity, much lower noise, and much better range. So we should be able to do a lot more communication with a lot less transmitter power, which is super duper exciting. Oh, that's an interesting note that I'm reading at the bottom of the wiki here. They have much higher idle power draw, but the draw and power to actually use those communications at range should be much less. All right, so checking that out on our Moonfarer 1 spacecraft. If we move this power up to 2, oh my gosh, look at that! Look at that increase! That is just like multiple orders of magnitude. Holy crap. Yep, so that increases our bandwidth by about 1,000-fold. or multiplies it by 1,000, which is, you know, that's pretty nice. And we can also, it looks like, tune it. Wait, hold on. Before we do that, let's bring this up to 400 million meters. 402. Okay, so even at like the default 30 dBm, man. So, gosh, I just can't even wrap my head around how incredibly potent that is. The only downside is that the idle power is going to be really, really high compared to what it was before. Like, it was less than a watt before, but now it's pretty darn heavy, to the point where we no longer have perpetual power when we have even full sunlight, just with the idle power of this receiver. So we may not be able to use this technology until we get better solar panels, higher technology solar panels that can draw more power. I would love to have like some fold-out ones that we could point everything directly at the sun, instead of having like only half of these solar panels actually useful, and needing to duplicate them and spend all that extra cost specifically for, you know, weight balance purposes. So yeah, it looks like that may take, like, there may be a better design that I can do. I could probably use a chunkier probe that's a little bit broader on the top, and then like put all of the solar panels in one direction, and then I could use the RCS to point it in that direction. But that would require kind of a redesign of my whole building philosophy. So that's something that I'll probably do in the future, and see if we can't make that work a little bit better. As promised, I have skipped a little bit ahead on this particular launch. This was another Thor Able that is putting up our Nimbus Satellites. This is another one of the early weather satellite contracts that we are just finishing up. There were, in reality, the Nimbus Satellites, there were 7 of them that were launched over 14 years, starting in 2 years from the time that we actually have launched this. They didn't start launching these until 1964. For over 20 years, the Nimbus satellites provided really consistent measurements of Earth's environment. So yeah, that's another one of those knocked out, and that gives us enough money to keep on moving forward. And I think that's actually the last of the early weather satellites that I need to do the next thing. And they have stolen this payload and kept that, which is just wonderful, which means I don't have to deal with it. Oh no, I had one more to do. Okay, so we do one more of these, and then we can move on to second generation weather satellites, which I have to assume are pay out a little bit better. All right, sometime overnight we finished our level 3 tracking station, which I think actually upgraded the model just slightly, which looks pretty darn cool. Well, it looks a little bit like in between right now. It's kind of got a scaffolding look to it. But anyways, yeah, so level 3, which gets us a big increase to our deep space network power, which will be really good for all of the probes that we're sending out. Between that and the digital communications upgrade, we should have a lot better communications between Earth and the Moon, and also Earth and pretty much any orbit at all. We're going from communications that were like 1 bit per second being sent back from the moon to like multiple kilobits, which is just fantastic. All right, while our Moonfarer 1 rocket is rolling out to the pad, I am just about to finish 1959 Orbital Rocketry, which I am all the way excited about. So, good news here is we have a couple of interesting new engines. This is going to get us the XLR-81 Agena A engine, which in the future I think is going to be our first real restartable upper stage. The first configuration does not have any restarts. It starts out pretty junky. It's marginally better in some ways than the AJ1047. But in other ways, it's not quite as good. Like it gets me about 800 more meters per second of delta V in my configuration tests, but it also increases the weight by almost a full ton, which is just a very large amount. Yeah, so that's an interesting new thing that's going to really be good. It's really going to shine in later configurations. I feel like that's a pretty common thing in RP-1, where the first configuration of any engine that you get is just not good. It's just not worth using. We've got the LR-87 and LR-91 booster and engine, which are the rockets that powered the Titan missiles, and eventually the Titan orbital launch vehicle, which most notably took up the Gemini missions. So that's something that we are 100% going to be interested in, but I have a striking feeling that that's not going to fit on the 150-ton pad. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't really played with those yet, but that's something that I have a feeling is going to be a later sort of thing. We also have the XLR-99, so we can finally do some X-15 shenanigans. And see if that works any better than the XLR-11s did. We also have some upgrades. So we have an upgrade to the AJ10-101A, which was used on the Able 2 variant of the Able upper stage, which, based on my testing, it's just straight up a little bit better in every way, which is nice. We've got an upgrade to the LR-79, which takes it from S3D up to the LR-79NA-9, also known as the MB3-1 on the Thor rocket. So that's what you should take from that, all those numbers and designations, is that this is an upgrade to the Thor. It's kind of an interesting one because it has a shorter burn time, and it's lighter and has higher thrust, so it gets you slightly worse performance, like 300 meters per second fewer delta V all told, but it has a much better thrust to weight ratio, which I think makes it better for heavier upper stages, ? I'm not 100% sure what the intention is for that upgrade, but it seems to be a good one, and the MB3-1 is in fact the one that was used on most of the production line Thor rockets. So yeah, I mean, if it's good enough for the US space program. And then we have an upgrade to a Soviet engine that I am not using this time around. So yeah, that's a lot of really good and interesting stuff. I've taken a bit of time before I sat down to record this to actually make some updates to my launch vehicles and to test out what missions that they would be good for. So let's get right to that, shall we? All right, here on the pad, we have my Moonfarer 1 mission. Ignition and liftoff of the Moonfarer 1 mission to the moon. Fantastic. All right, so we are heading out on my brand new Tela 1 rocket, which is based obviously on the Atlas. So this is the configuration, I believe, that the RP-1 Discord community calls the Drop Tank Atlas. So the original Atlas rocket, a very venerable launch system indeed, was a stage and a half style booster. So it actually had, all of this was one tank basically. Instead of having separate boosters that were held apart by decouplers, it had a single skirt on the bottom that had a mounting bit where the LR-89 engines would attach, and this was still in the center, and then there was like a skirt that came down, and then these were locked onto that. And then when it got to a certain altitude, it would drop those the skirt and these two boosters, leaving just the sustainer stage. And the reason why they did that is because they were not 100% sure if they could actually light a big engine like this in orbit or off the ground at all, I suppose. Because a lot of the upper stage engines that we were using at this point are hypergolic, which means you mix the two fuels and then kaboom, like that's just how it works, as opposed to these, which are relatively stable when you mix them, but you have to apply some kind of external heat or spark or something to get them going. So yeah, they weren't sure that that was going to work at all, so that was from a time where we just didn't know, but we know now, and I honestly don't even do it I don't even use this as like a middle stage or a second stage or upper stage or whatever. I do still light all three on the ground, because I find that this works fine. Like, I probably could have a long, skinny stage on the bottom with two of these boosters. Off you go. Boom. They do a little fist bump on their way down. But yeah, I could have like a stage with 2 of those on the bottom, Titan style, and then a big second stage with this. But I found that this system works, the one that I'm using here. Maybe it's not the most optimal. Let me know what you think of that in the comments below. But yeah, this is my Tela 1 launch system, which mocks the Atlas a little bit. The Atlas is like one of the most venerable launch systems. It's been used forever and ever and has gone through a million different updates and upgrades to make it so that it's, you know, is still in use today as the Delta rocket. But yeah, so it has those boosters that kick it up to a good altitude, and then this sustainer stage just goes on for another 2 minutes. I guess the one last thing to mention is the big design boost on here is that the Tela rocket is able to get the Able upper stage, even though it's the same one that's used on the Thor. It gets it completely into orbit unfired, which is a massive boost in overall performance. And there go the fairings on the payload, exposing that. So yeah, we are using the Atlas Able configuration of this, so we do have the Able stage up here. I know we just unlocked the node with all the new stuff, but this is actually one of my last old style rockets. So going forward, I'll be using the new stuff, but I didn't see any reason to delay this build anymore when I know that this should work. An interesting thing is that the booster stages and upper stages were a little bit like they swapped around a little bit. Like there's a Thor, so the Thor and the Atlas both had an Able upper stage variant, and they both had a Agena upper stage variant. So we'll be playing a little bit with both of those. Right now, the Able upper stage is much more mature and does what we need it to do. It's not super interesting to use the Agena until it actually gets restarts, because this is a lighter stage. It has less delta V, less capability, but it's lighter, which is really important. In all of my testing, there's a certain amount of payload that I can put on top of a Able stage, and my Atlas, my Tela here, can get that directly into orbit. So I don't need to use any of the upper stage. So I can put almost 3 tons, like 2.7 tons by my testing, into a direct low Earth orbit, and then do things with it from there, which allows you to do lots of stuff. It's not sheer delta V that you need to really worry about. It's actually having discrete stages that can be controlled and powered. So yeah, as you can see, this gets this whole Able stage into orbit with just 300 meters per second left over. There's a little bit more that we could do, like we could go a little bit higher or change the inclination a little bit. Like I said, I found this to be a very versatile launch system. So let's just go ahead and kick off that booster stage. And one of my favorite things about this is that actually puts it to the point where it should burn up in re-entry eventually. So it actually doesn't leave that stage in orbit, which I absolutely love about it. So yeah, here we go. We have our Able stage, and then we have our first deep space probe up on top of it. All right, so we have launched into the plane of the moon. So I think, whoops, we don't want to do that. We want to turn off some of these extra satellites to clean up this view. I promise I do want to set the moon as the target. And let's go ahead and see what kind of orbit we can get, because this is indeed an orbital mission. So that's so freaking exciting. We are finally going to be trying to put this into orbit, and so there's a couple different considerations I would like to make. All right, we are lined up and ready to go, just about to make our burn towards the moon. Kaboom! And no issue in lighting up our AJ-1042. Fabulous! I was a little worried about that. But yeah, so that should get us, in theory... Why are you flickering like that? That's very strange. Yeah, so it's not sure if it's going to use this whole stage or what it's going to do. But anyways, we are on our way to the moon. This trajectory, in theory, will have this Able stage actually impact the moon to discard it completely. And on the way over there, I will be using these little generic thrusters that have unlimited restarts to correct my trajectory. And hopefully things are a lot more visible now that I've turned up the ambient lighting. Let me know what you guys think of that. Yeah, so we are on our way. I'm pretty stoked about getting this done because this is going to be a very scientific mission. With all the extra Delta V that I had on my transfer stage, I decided that I would pack every experiment I possibly could. And yeah, I'll show you what the plan is with that as I go to fiddle with my final orbit. Nothing too terribly special about finding a home and transfer to the moon, which is what I've basically done here, although it's a little bit of an accelerated one. We're still doing the thing where we put a little extra radial on our trajectory, and then we make that work so that there's extra, wiggle room, extra margin of error in the burn in case that MacLeod decides it can't quite be as precise as I would like it to be. Which is, not MacLeod's fault, to be clear. That's based on the thrust-to-weight ratio and lack of control that rockets of this caliber or this era have. Yeah, so anyways, this is a mission that should, in theory, knock out the Lunar Orbiter contract for the first time. We're going to be able to do a couple of these, but it should also act as a science mission, because like I said, I have all sorts of really cool science on here that I'm going to start deploying, well, right now, actually. Let's open this up and take a look. We can get magnetic scans. No? Oh, that's right, because it has to literally deploy. Telemetry we already have. Supersonic, that's not going to be a thing. Yeah, so we have a couple science experiments that will be running. And there we go, just about finishing up our orbit. MacLeod finishing it up with RCS, which is very nice. Although I don't actually find that to be necessary. So let's abort this node execution, and there we go. We already have our impact trajectory with the moon. Fabulous. All right, so something that I want to do while we're kind of on our way out there is I want to get us into a trajectory that is going to get better science coverage around the moon. So what I'm thinking is that if we can put like just a little bit of, not radial, but normal, I want to go up over the top of the moon and get into a heavily inclined orbit, because I believe that is going to get us more coverage of different biomes as we perform multiple close flybys. And I also want to get in nice and tight. So that's where the radial comes in. We want to get in nice and tight to actually get that low science. Yeah, so we'll call it a 71. Actually, look at that. We can get even more normal. There we go. Let's call that 134 kilometers, although that is not going to be visible by the Kennedy Space Center. It's not going to be visible to Earth because there's a whole bunch of moon in the way. So we need to be careful about where we make our burn, because we need to actually be able to, see. All right, so that is the final trajectory that I have planned. The periapsis on this is not going to be, or the paraloon, pardon me, is not something that I think we're going to be able to circularize directly at, because I'm fairly certain there's going to be too much moon in the way for us to be able to get communication. So I'm going to plan to try to circularize somewhere up here over the pole and use some radial burn to try to keep at least a partial swing through low lunar orbit. If I do it right, then we should be able to get a consistent, if small and slow, amount of science from low lunar orbit. All right, so that planning done. Let's go ahead and point this at the sun, actually, which is a little closer to prograde, just so that we can use the Able stages RCS before I, stage this off. Waste not, want not, and all that. All right, stage SEP, and we are rotating. This is something that's fixed in the later version, but so that means we have to activate avionics on our deep space probe. And I wish that that wouldn't spend quite as much delta V, but it's fine. It should be all right. The trick is that we actually have a ton of delta V as far as just capturing around the moon. It's just getting the orbit as precise as we want it to be is what is expensive. So let's get this pointed directly at the sun once again. Yeah, there we go. So we can turn smartass off, and we can shut down the avionics, and you'll see that reduces our power usage from 60 watts down to 3, which is pretty humongous. Just looking at this, we have perpetual electric charge with the avionics off. If we have it on, then we're going to die in 9 hours. So that just shows you the difference there. Yeah, so here we go. This is my deep space probe. So the design that I've gone with for now is asymmetrical, which I kind of love. It has all of the science experiments, and some of them are the exterior models because specifically I wanted to be able to balance these asymmetric parts. So I actually have the magnetometer boom hanging off the side here. I actually have the Communotron 16 sticking off this side, and the early television camera there to balance that out. And the barometer and thermometer in there doing their own thing. And that actually gets this down to perfectly, well, as perfectly balanced as I could possibly get it. It was showing me 0 newtons of torque on firing the engines when I was playing with RCS Build Aid. Yeah, so this probe core also has every other science experiment that we have right now. So the idea is we are going to get into a nice inclined orbit over the top of the moon, and that is going to hopefully get us lots and lots of science. We should be dipping from low to high orbit, which means we are just going to be getting as many biomes as I can possibly get out of this. We'll be sending 1 or 2, or 2? I think there's 2 of these contracts that you can do. So we'll be doing that. The build here is using hydrazine, which is what is unlocked with the flight control node, early flight control, which is a very high ISP RCS fuel. It does require a pressurized tank, I believe a high pressurized tank, but it's pretty darn well worth it. It also works really well with these little generic thrusters, which I found these little dual radial thrusters that work incredibly well and are much better than the other 2 that I have unlocked at this point. So I'm not sure why I wouldn't just use these all the time. And so it's a shared pool of hydrazine that is used by these thrusters and the RCS. And yeah, like I have shown you before, I have changed up my solar panel design because they're very expensive and rather heavy. I've decided to put all of them on just one side of my spacecraft, so I can then just rotate that spacecraft to face the sun, and then there we go. Now I don't have to worry about the different numbers that I was getting in the VAB. So anyways, yeah, this is my deep space probe, what I'm calling the Moonfarer 1, and it is heading off. So in just 6 hours, we are going to make a small correction burn that will get us on a better trajectory into the moon's orbit. All right, and the power of deep space avionics is that now that we need the avionics, we can just flip it on and rotate around nodeward and keep our solar panel pointed directly at the sun at all other times. And yeah, as we are about to fire off our engines, like I said, these are the generic thrusters, and they're a little bit magical in that they just don't ever need to they don't have ignitions, they don't have mean time between failure, they just work all the time, every time, for as long as you need them. So it's, I don't know, I'm not sure if it's kosher to like actually build like big stages that deal with them. Like one of my possible designs for another contract had something like a and cut the throw. Oh shoot, what in the world? Off kill rotation, please. See how we did. Okay, that's just fine. Yeah, one of my other designs ended up for a different contract, for the geostationary contract, ended up having something like a It ended up having a generic thruster stage that had like 2 kilometers per second. Oops, please kill rotation. You're just wasting fuel right now. I've got the smallest possible RCS quads on here, but I still feel like I should like... Let's just have the thrust. I do not need it to be moving as fast as it's moving me. Small, slow movements are just fine for these types of probes. All right, so there we go, 100% exposure, so that should last a while, and you can see we have 1% wear. That's a thing that happens with RO solar. These will wear out over time. But yeah, so I don't know if 2 kilometer per second generic thruster stages are like unkosher or whatever, but I wound up not using it because I hated it. Like, it just didn't, like, I didn't want to do a 6-minute burn, and it was fairly expensive to control a stage that large. So I guess that's the built-in deterrent, but yeah, these are pretty interesting and potent engines, and something that I've been really excited to play with. All right, so now we are just heading out to the sphere of influence of the moon. It is going to be almost 2 days worth of travel, during which we are getting lovely, lovely high space science around the moon. Or high space science from Earth, that is. So one thing, now that we are in orbit of the moon, you can see that we have a pretty good signal. It's starting to turn orange there. I like the little gradient between here and Earth, but there was a time where I was incredibly excited to get 1 bit per second up and down from the moon, but now I have 492. So that is a pretty sizable increase in my capacity for transmitting science back home. So yeah, we should be able to get a lot more science back now that we are using digital communications. All right, so here is what I have kind of come up with. The intent is to come up, and at the last minute, while we still have connection with Earth, we are going to circularize, and not quite circularize. We are going to make ourselves have a bit of an elliptical orbit that swings out a little bit high, 2 million meters above the surface of the moon, but it keeps our periloon down at 70 kilometers, which means we will be deep inside the low space environment for the moon, which will get us all kinds of different science. And so over time, we should be able to cycle around and get a variety of science for all the instruments that we have. And you can see we're already sending stuff back, which is just lovely. So, and that leaves us with a little bit of delta V remaining so that I can use the RCS to point at things, point mostly at the sun, and then turn off the control and all that. So 12.5 hours until we get to that part of the moon that we want to circularize our first orbiter. All right, just a couple minutes to our burn in our lunar insertion burn. So yeah, very exciting stuff. Everything seems to be working out so far. We've still got good signal, good control. I think I was a little bit generous with where I had this burn start, but I was never going to get like a tight, low orbit around Earth. And yeah, I don't have any problem erring on the side of caution. That is usually not something that is ever punished too much in RP-1. You do have to be bold from time to time in making sure that you get nail contracts and keep up with dates and that sort of thing. But yeah, just being cautious is always a good thing. All right, so we are unlocking, and we are going to, I'm actually just going to have MacLeod execute this node for me so I can babble a little bit about the Lunar Orbiter, the incredibly creatively named probe that the U.S. space program, NASA, launched in 1966. So we are actually about 3 years ahead of the first American lunar orbit. Oh, and that actually wasn't much further. That wasn't actually much further behind Luna 10, which was the Soviet first lunar orbit satellite, which happened also in 1966, but just a couple of months before the Americans got there. Yeah, so we're beating both space programs by about 3 years. I think the reason that we're able to do that is because we're cavemanning it a little bit, I guess. I'm not sure if you could call this caveman. We're doing I'm kind of doing the right thing, I think. I'm not sure what else I could be doing, but yeah, the Americans and the Soviets both got here with later technology than we are using. And I think that that's just time that we are going to need to be making up because we have a lot of research left to do. But anyways, yeah, so Luna 10 and the very creatively named Lunar Orbiter, they were both early spacecraft that were used to photograph and take measurements and readings of the moon's surface. They were both intended kind of with the extra purpose of not just doing science, but also they were there to photograph possible landing sites for their lander programs. So the Americans were trying to make sure that the surveyor landers would have good places and defined like interesting features that they would want to land nearby. And same thing for Apollo. They were looking at radiation intensity, micrometeorite impact data, that sort of thing. Just trying to find what interesting surface features and what dangers might lie in wait for any robotic or crewed landers that they would send later on. The Lunar Orbiter 1, the first American orbiter of the moon, was put into a just about equatorial orbit. They didn't do this polar thing because I don't think that they got more science for going in orbit of particular biomes. What are you doing? Oh, this must actually not be as balanced as I thought it was. Fascinating. Yeah, I thought that this was perfectly balanced, at least it was according to RCS build aid, but it looks like it's firing this thruster to keep it from rotating. But I'm not going to complain. It seems to be working just fine. And hopefully that doesn't decrease our delta V too much, because it might end up being a little bit tight. But, you know, here's kind of the thing. They can't really take away from us the fact that we are in our proper and correct orbit right now. The only thing that we're going to gain by continuing this burn is getting a lower orbit that is going to go through the low orbit space a little bit. And that's also, and just kind of bring down our orbital period a little bit. So I may even just abort this node execution when we get pretty close, if it looks like our delta V is getting too low to actually finish the burn. All right, so just a couple more seconds, and it looks like, yes, we have indeed wasted some. I'm going to just abort now. Looks like we have wasted some delta V orienting the spacecraft and holding it in particular positions, but that is, like I said, that's fine. I'm not that stressed about it. We are in, oops, we don't even have control anymore, actually. Yeah, see, this is what I was worried about. We are already at the point where we do not have control. So hopefully, I don't actually know if this is true now that I think about it. I'm not sure if you keep gathering science from Kerbalism by when you don't have connection. So that it may be kind of a moot point all this time that we're spending in low orbit, mostly behind the moon, with the moon in between us and Earth and their communications. I might not be gathering any science anyways, so who knows. But one thing I can say for certain is we have completed the Lunar Orbiter uncrewed contract. Our orbit is confirmed, and we got some excellent new data. We have a paraloon of 88 kilometers and a apoloon of 2.5 million meters over the lunar surface. So there we go. We did it, and that got us a ton of money, which is fabulous. But yeah, pretty darn close, and this is going to get us so much science. I am so excited about it. And once we get around the moon to the point where I have control once again, let's go ahead and time warp around, and coming down over the southern pole of the moon, and yeah, there we go. See, it worked exactly the way I hoped it would. Yes! Oh man, that's so cool. So we just got a ton of science transmitted back from low orbit, because we are now back up to 450,000 meters. But that means that that dip we took down into the low space environment of the moon actually got us science, so we are going to transmit that back. Ah, that's so exciting. I love it when things work out. So yeah, now the last thing we have is just delete that node. We don't need to worry about that. We can close that off. Now I just need to flip on the avionics. Oh, the avionics were on the whole time. That's not great. The nice thing is that when you're in time warp, it shuts off the avionics automatically. Let's go ahead and point radial minus. No, radial plus, away from the surface of the moon. All right, now you see that it's actually doing like the realistic pop burst thrusting of the RCS nodes that it does in real life, basically. Oh, it got a little too ambitious for its own good there. Turned a little too hard. Anyways, I could just be doing this. All right, so we are coming around and pointing our solar panel, the one big solar panel on the front, on this cycloptic probe directly at the sun so that it has 100% exposure. There we go, 100%, and let it stabilize. Okay, turn that off and turn off the avionics. There we go. We are locked in position and ready to do science for the long haul around the moon. Fantastic. We have been basically starved of science. We finished off our last node. That orbital rocketry node that we got was the last one that I had queued up. So thank goodness we are finally getting more science. With that big lunar mission complete, we have a bunch more money, and I've actually spent a bunch of our science already, so as more comes in, I'll be putting in more, but in the meantime, we have some other stuff to be working on. First of all, we have just about finished my modifications to the X-15 spaceplane, so after the disastrous flight last time, I have made some modifications that should hopefully make it less terrifying for poor Johnny Flores, but I make no promises about that. So yeah, this should be ready to go. So we're going to prep this for air launch. It's going to take 27 days. I assume that has a lot to do with the fact that it's pretty much at the upper bounds of the weight limit of the spaceplane hangar currently. So yeah, it's going to take a long time to air launch because it is a big, heavy chonker of a thing. It's just under 18 tons. My original design, I actually had to tweak back downwards because it was so heavy. But yeah, so 27 days, that should be done, and Johnny Flores is going to be training, and he'll finish that in 21 days. So let's get rid of that. That is the bounding function there. Fabulous. Okay. And as we come back around to morning time for this launch, you'll see we've gotten another 34 science, and even some popped in just as I was talking just now. Yeah, so that lunar probe is really getting us our money's worth and passing back tons and tons of science. We have set up the 1959-1960 solid rocket engines node for research, which is going to get us finally the Altair upper stage, which I kind of want at this point just because it's been bugging me that every time I look into historical builds of the Thor rocket, it keeps telling me Altair upper stage. It uses Altair as the final kick motor, and I'm like, well, I don't have that. I've been using a GCRC as a stand-in, which has been working fairly well. But yeah, finally getting the actual historical completion of that rocket is just something that is going to make me happy. And then after that, we have 1960 Orbital Rocketry coming in because I need restarts to my engines. I thought that the 1959 Agena was going to have a restart, but I was not correct in that. So 1960 should finally have engines that have restarts, and that is going to change everything about how we play. So with those two nodes researched and ready to go, we still have enough to get one more. We could pick up human-rated EDL, entry, descent, and landing, which is going to get us basically just heat shields, but I'm not particularly... I don't really understand why I would get that now if I couldn't also get basic capsules like immediately afterwards. Like it's a prerequisite, but not one that is going to do anything for us between now and when we get capsules, if that makes sense. And the same thing with crew survivability. That basically just gets us better life support tanks and the Kerbalism configuration engine, which, I mean, I'm not sure why that needs to be an extra part. Feels like that should be a... Oh, I see. I think I understand. So what I think this does is you slap this on the side of a tank and it'll give you the proper ratio, just like if you put an engine on a modular fuel tank, it'll automatically say like, hey, put in this amount of everything. So yeah, that makes sense. It seems a little odd that you have to have a workaround like that, but I get it. But yeah, this is just another prerequisite node that is not useful to us before we get capsules. These two nodes are Blue Sky Research into Early Human Spaceflight Era Materials Science. It's a bit of a mouthful. It gets us some extra crew science experiments, which are not super useful until we can actually get crew in space. And the same thing with this electronics research. They're both going to unlock things, but this one is also going to get us a service module tank upgrade, which are still pretty bad. I'm not sure that there's actually a ton of improvement that this will give us for putting up like ComSat payloads and things like that, but maybe there's some. But that is also a key prerequisite to unlocking basic capsules. Basically, everything to the right of these two nodes is gated behind them. So we, yeah, I think there's nothing except for these flight nodes. No, even these. Yep, everything past this point, past 1960, is gated behind spaceflight materials science and spaceflight electronics research, which makes sense to me. So let's go ahead and start out with spaceflight materials research. And I've heard that you get this message now from Kerbalism that these nodes are unlocked, but it actually correctly is not supposed to unlock until you actually finish researching the node, which is good. All right, so now our labs are cranking away, and in the meantime, I mentioned that I did a little bit of a design phase, so let's go ahead and see the fruits of that. We can start grabbing, let's see, not grabbing too many contracts, because we don't want to overcommit ourselves and promise that we're going to be able to do things that we're not actually going to be able to do in time. We don't want to fail any or expire any contracts just because I got ahead of myself. Even though I'm designed on all this stuff, there's always, you know, engine failures and things like that. So with that in mind, I'm just going to duplicate the rockets that I already have building rather than overcommitting ourselves. Let's just make sure that we get these contracts done first, and that makes sure that we're going to have a nice influx of cash after we finish these missions. So because we have that bit of insurance that we're going to get these contracts finished, let's go ahead and start spending some of our KCT upgrade points, which we've earned 3 just out of the science that we've gotten, which is fabulous. So let's go ahead and spend most of this, actually. We'll take it down to about 46,000, which gives me 15 more points, and I want to plow most of this into research. So I'm pretty happy with where our VAB is, but I would like very much, we'll put just 2-3 points in there just because I'm feeling jaunty. But yeah, we want to start focusing a little bit on research and development so that we can start cranking through this stuff. I'm finding that it's taking longer to get to like there's a bunch of stuff that we need to do, right? Like there's 4, 5, 6 nodes that we need all of before we can really move on to the manned spaceflight phase. So let's work on plowing through that while we're building rockets. The build speed is getting to be fairly reasonable. We're able to crank out a Thor Able in 60-ish days, depending on the payload. And the Atlas rockets, the Tela rockets, don't take so much longer. Like they're still like close to double that, but it's getting relatively low. So I want to focus on getting a little bit on the R&D side so we can get to new stuff faster. All right, so the X-15 is ready for air launch. All right, and the X-15 has been dropped from the launch plane, and we are tipping it on back. This has undergone some fairly significant adjustments since I last flew it. I have extended the fuselage so that it has more fuel, so it has more capacity for flying up and out of the atmosphere. So we are tipping ourselves up into a 45-degree trajectory. This thing could probably fly straight up because it has a nearly 2 a thrust to weight ratio of nearly 2, over 2 now. So yeah, let's just tip up. We want this to go about as fast as we possibly can, up and out of the atmosphere, and then my thought is then we'll level off a little bit so that I can get some, so I can slow our vertical velocity. But step the first is getting out of the atmosphere. So on our way up, as it turns out, only 2 of the X-15 flights actually left Earth's atmosphere, actually passed the Kármán line at all. The highest one actually only went 107.8 kilometers, and that was Joseph A. Walker on Flight 91. And the reason why I think that there weren't a whole lot of that and not a whole lot of emphasis on making that go, you know, further and faster and all that was because the Mercury program predated it by 2 years. So yeah, a little bit out of order chronologically speaking, at least for us, for our playthrough. All right, so we are just about there, and I am tipping weirdly up, and engine cut off. All right, so let's see how that does. That leaves us with quite a bit of fuel left over, but I'm hopeful that this is going to be something relatively safe for Johnny Flores to come back from. But yeah, the X-Planes program was kind of a test of a different method of flying humans into space, but it was also a lot of testing of the near Earth environment, like so the upper atmosphere, how people were able to travel through that, what supersonic velocities did to you, that sort of thing. And it was a little bit waylaid by the Mercury program because we decided capsules were the way to go. All right, so as we get up to our apogee of 172 kilometers, we've got new science coming. And here we go. So Earth photography. So we've got Johnny Flores just kind of leaning out the window, taking pictures. Well, not out the window, I hope. And also working on his crew report, which he may actually finish this time. But yeah, so that's some new science and some excellent new capability for this rocket, which, you know, I hope doesn't shred itself to pieces on its way back down. Yeah, so something that the X-15 pilots never actually piloted the X-15 like completely out of the atmosphere in the way that we are doing here. They always did kind of like horizontal testing in the upper atmosphere and then dipped above the Kármán line for just a second during those flights. But really, it was not about shooting out of the atmosphere like I just did. So this is going to bring us in on a bit of a ballistic trajectory, which I'm not super stoked about, but I'm hopeful that this plane will handle. It's something that has worked fine in testing, but you know, things change sometimes, and I'm very hopeful that everything works out fine for our Johnny Flores, who, as mentioned in the comments of my previous video, are so abused. I have done bad things to our poor X-Plane pilots. I really do not like how far down this... yeah, that's not great. That's really a lot of... Oh my god, look at the negative vertical speed. Okay, I need to do something about that, and I think that thing is lighting this engine again, because I don't think we're going to survive a fall of that magnitude. Oh man, I have so little control. Okay. Well, I'm flipping now. Okay, so that's not great. Well, I guess while I'm back here, let's just, you know, flip on this engine and cut some... cut the velocity all up. Oh my gosh, this is an incredible Kerbal thing that I'm doing right now. If this works at all, I must have... Wow, what? My balance must be off to some kind of horrifying degree that it starts to actually torque the entire plane like that. So yeah, we're coming back around for, you know, hopefully... Nope, I need to raise the nose. All right, so 360 no scope appears to be the way that I have flown my X-15. There are some serious design flaws that did not make themselves manifest until just now. But I mean, geez, I don't know what else I was... We are still pointing down and coming down at pretty horrifying speed. All right, we are starting to bite into the atmosphere, and I am trying to pull up. We have about 5 Gs that we are pulling. A little bit more, but we are leveling off. Okay, let's just ease up off the stick there, and I think we are safe. That was absolutely ridiculous. This is what happens when I fly my own planes. Oh my gosh. But yeah, that vertical speed was getting to be really a lot, and I'm not 100% sure that even the spaceplane wings and all that I have on this thing would have survived. Oops, still got to be careful with our... Very careful on the adjustments here. Alright, so we've cut the velocity down to about 400 meters per second, and I think we're safe at this point. Now I guess we're going to see how this thing does in level flight going back to the runway. That was deeply silly. Yeah, so something that I may have mentioned, but yeah, I did the design of this plane, and then I recorded some, and I tested it, and then I made some updates to it, and I think that's all been part of the same block of footage. Like, so I haven't actually shown anybody this X-15 yet in between the multiple uses and edits, and I think that means there's probably giant glaring flaws that people would be saying, like, dude, what are you doing? How could you have put such an abomination into the air and expected things to not flip 360 degrees around? Yeah, because you guys are actually really great about telling me, giving me tips and suggestions on how to improve the craft that I show you. I'm definitely not, this is not a master class in how exactly you should play RP-1. This is just how I'm playing RP-1 and sharing my fuddling with you guys. But yeah, I'm sure I'll find out all the ways that this was a terrible idea from the start, but was it really a terrible idea if it worked? So we've nailed a 160 kilometer total total altitude record. We are coming down over the space plane's runway. I have popped my parachutes, and we are turning around. And there we go. Maybe question mark. Turn off all the fly-by-wire and stuff. And looks like we are pointing straight down, so that is also not great. Apparently the center of mass is a little bit further forward than I thought it was when I was designing this parachute system. So hopefully this isn't going to give poor Johnny Flores too much of a bump. Oh gosh. So a 9 meter per second impact is 20 miles per hour. So this is not going to be a lot of fun. I'm so sorry, Johnny. Oh man, here we go. Oh. Okay. But we're good, right? Oh my god. This is terrible. But it worked. Is it really that terrible if it was successful, if I was able to actually complete the suborbital flight crewed contract? The crew has returned safely. We put another person in space. This is the first person that I have put into the actual space environment, and they have done it again and come home safely, and this plane should probably be decommissioned and never see the light of day again, but of course I'm not going to do that. Of course I'm going to fly it again. But not without some redesigns and some rethinking. A little spoiler alert from future me, I've done some work on that off screen and for future episodes, so definitely leave me some comments on what you'd like to see with that one. But yeah, there is some fixes that are coming, and I think that is a great place to leave it this time. Made a lot of really excellent progress, and I'm super excited about. So we're going to get around to spending some upgrades and doing some other things later on. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and I will see you next time.